buy houses, this whole crazy system could keep going here. Okay, so we're going to go back to the basics here. I'm going to go back to the buckets. What was happening to inflation, money supply, and the Federal Reserve actions at this point. So now we're moving a little bit further forward. We're in the 2006-2007 time frame. So the number of people getting mortgages, new money pumping into the system, though still high, is starting to shrink. Speculators are the biggest component of new credit creation here. Quality of borrowers goes to mind-numbing lows at this point. Stories of illegal immigrants without even a job being able to buy houses in California and Arizona and Florida. We all know the stories. Home equity loans start drying up at this point. Basically, what you start to see here is the last fool is starting to come into view here. Because, if you come over to this side, the bucket has completely filled. This is where you start to see inflation really rocket out of control. This is where we started to see oil prices skyrocket to 146 a barrel, steel prices, doubling in 3 months. There's a real fear of hyperinflation, meaning they lose control of the bucket and water just literally just starts spilling out and prices basically unhinge. You start to see inflation rates starting to hit 7% over here, and the Fed reacts. They raise rates even more. You remember Alan Greenspan dropped interest rates to create this bubble to get people buying. Well, as he saw the bucket starting to fill, he started to raise interest rates to hopefully hold that bucket. Well, he lost control of the situation. Water started to fill. As prices rise, you have normal cost of living. Oil feeds into everything, food prices, natural gas, electrical, all this stuff. You have all these people who could barely afford their homes at this point. They're just barely holding on. A lot of them are speculators. They're hoping that they could sell and come right back into the top of the bucket. Well, the problem is the number of people buying at the top here are drying up. These people are forced to hold on to their houses. They all of a sudden start finding their adjustable rate mortgages going up, sometimes 25, 30, 50% in a very short period of time. All their normal costs of living start to skyrocket. Foreclosures start in this time frame. You start to see a spike in bankruptcies. You start to see some of the first really risky funds starting to implode at this point. Okay. Also, what needs to be noted on this slide here is to me, the biggest factor was the price of oil. As the price of oil kept rising and rising, we all remember, $4, $4.50, $4.75, dollar gasoline at pumps. Whereas it cost you $40, $45 to fill your SUV or your pickup truck. You're starting to see $100, $90 to fill a truck. All these things are coming together as this bucket starts to fill. You start to get inflation really starting to get out of control again. This starts feeding fear over on this side again, just like in 2001 following 9/11. The fear is a little slower to come along, whereas 9/11 was a moment in time where everybody at the same time had the same fear. This is a growing fear. Slowly but surely, quarter after quarter, people start seeing this inflation, which feeds into this side where people get fearful and stop buying houses, stop buying cars. Not in huge numbers, but more and more. I don't have it on this slide. It was on the previous one. It's what I call the Dave Ramsey factor. Flowing under all of this inflation and credit and people going insane, going into insane amounts of debt, is this counter current. I kind of considered myself part of that counter current going all the way back to 2002. That built steam as years went by. Dave Ramsey is a financial advisor who is big on pay off debt, stay out of debt. Your FICO score is not your credit worthiness. It's basically your indebtedness factor. I think he's got some cute saying about that. But under all of this is a growing movement of people. Stay out of debt, get out of debt, pay off your credit cards, stop living such an extravagant life. This feeds further into the payoff. Definitely feeds into the top part of this. But to me, it was the oil component. I'll go into on future videos about peak oil, what it means and how this affects everything that's going on here. For now, it's just to understand that it was oil prices ultimately that started pushing inflation to these levels, that started pushing people to the brink, along with raised interest rates and everything else that was going on. So this would be 2006, 2007. Things started really turning bad at the beginning of 2007. So we move on. The Federal Reserve, Treasury, the Bush administration, they see all this happening. I mean, they're getting, by now it's Ben Bernanke is now the Federal Reserve Chair, Alan Greenspan having stepped down. At the peak of all this, I don't think it was good timing. I think he knew exactly what was coming. Ben Bernanke was set up there to really be the fall guy, to be the bad guy here. Alan Greenspan got to basically drop the microphone and walk off stage at the top of his game. So what starts happening here is, the AAA, remember the AAA mortgages, they're bundled, they're sent up to Fannie Mae, they're being sold off to 401k retirement accounts. Well, this AAA stuff is really getting hard to find. The smart people, who are usually the AAA rated people, they're not willing to go into debt anymore. They're starting to pull back. They're not going into these risky mortgages anymore. That revenue stream starts drying up. So basically, you got over here pension funds, 401k, retirement accounts. Stop. People are not buying them anymore. And to be honest, the amount is starting to dry up also. So what Fannie and Freddie have to do is they have to come up with ways of bundle, because the grease that keeps this whole thing going is Wall Street. So long as Wall Street kept buying Fannie and Freddie mortgages, which remember they're buying from the banks below them, they need to find a way, it's called collateralizing. They need to get this money flowing. The biggest amounts of money are coming from pension funds, 401ks. That money is drying up. Even though there's still an appetite for the junk bond, when I say junk, I'm talking about the really risky mortgages that were written. People who had bad credit, weren't putting money down, no documentation loans, people getting loans without even having to prove they had a job. That's junk. That's what they call the toxic waste, or the subprime mortgages. Even that is starting to have a hard time being sold. They understand what's going to happen is if this freezes up, you go right back to the deflationary spiral, all the way back to, I think it was slide 3 or 4, where the water level starts to drop. People panic. You start seeing layoffs. More people get panicked, and it feeds upon itself. So this would be the normal collateralization process. This would be prior to a lot of the crazy stuff they started pulling in 2005, 2006. Over here in the green, this would be your AAA rated stuff. You have thousands of houses all gathered together, bundled. Moody's is a ratings firm. They come in and their whole job is to assess risk and to give investors knowledge about what they're buying. So Moody's can come in and say, you know what, these are all great mortgages. They stamp them AAA. The pension funds, the 401ks, unions, they are only allowed to buy AAA rated bonds. They have to be very conservative given the type of money they're dealing with. They're not allowed to go out and be reckless. So they're looking for AAA rated stuff. They gobbled up this stuff early on. Over here you have the people who are doing the negative amortizations, people who, no money down loans, no documentation loans, subprime junk, bundled up all together. sold as such. People had an appetite for this because